Hi and welcome to our next video in regards to nutrition. We're talking about carbohydrates. So we're going to pretty much go through why we need carbohydrates, how we use carbohydrates, and a little bit of things that you might need to know in regards to carbohydrates to maybe make you make some better choices for your diets in the future. So basically, in a nutshell, carbohydrates get broken down into glucose. As the body goes to use the glucose, if there's anything that's left over the body doesn't need, it then converts it to glycogen, and then the liver will then store it. Now, if you're eating, say, like very high sugar diets, which is where if it fit your macros or the calories in, calories out equation, can be a little bit screwy. If you're eating too many fast-acting sugars, so like more of this stuff and less of this stuff, then you're going to start seeing fatty liver. So fatty liver essentially is just too much fat inside the liver, because as the body then stores the glycogen, obviously it needs to convert it into fats and it can store it because it can't actually store sugar. So that's when, if it fits your macros, calories in, calories out can still be equated for, but just make sure obviously you're getting more of your whole food sources. So this is the glycemic index. This is probably the easiest way to describe carbohydrates and to kind of help put across the idea that sugar isn't bad for you unless you are eating large doses. So like we just mentioned, fatty liver disease. So the glycemic index is an index that was created basically on the premise that they would feed people 100 grams of carbohydrates from different sources, which would then end up on the glycemic index. So let's say, for example, like sugar, so 100 grams worth of carbohydrates in sugar would have an insulin spike, so you'd have really fast amounts of sugar, but then as that sugar crash, or the sugar high rather, starts to taper off, you actually end up kind of worse for energy than where you were at the start. So let's say like your white potatoes as opposed to your sweet potatoes. The more dietary fiber and the more micronutrients you have, generally you'll find yourself on this more of a curve as opposed to the higher curve. But then as we get down to this lower one here, so that's, so your sweet potatoes, things that are going to take a longer amount of time to digest, things that have dietary fiber, things that have micronutrients that the body has to digest and absorb and utilize as well. So are these better or worse than each other? Not really. So yes, this one here has less micronutrients, so you want to focus on it less. However, this one here, if you're not into your pre-workouts and things like that, before and after your workouts, you want to be having a little bit more of these ones as opposed to the long with, especially after your workout. And you want to get your glycogen storages back up as quickly as you can. But then throughout the day, especially if you're trying to lose weight, you want to be eating more of these ones here because you're going to be feeling fuller for longer. You're not going to be snacking as much through the day, and you're going to be able to adhere to your diet a little bit more as well. So at the end of the day, how do you make a decision? Again, whole foods are more or less going to be sitting along this line here, so make sure you're getting as much of those as you can. However, if you are going to have a workout here or there, and you do want to say have a couple of lollies or something to give you that quick start or spike your insulin after a workout, then you can go for these ones here. But the question is, how much? How much glycogen can our body hold on to and utilize at one time without it spilling over? Now again, at the end of the day, calories in, calories out is the ultimate equation. If you are eating more than you're spending, you're going to be putting on excess storage of energy, fat. But at a general consensus, there are two ways that our body can hold on to carbohydrates or glycogen. So the first one is in muscle tissue. So in muscle tissue, that's where we'll have our explosiveness. That's where we can kind of utilize those carbohydrates. And you've probably heard people getting like a pump. A pump is when you have got enough carbohydrates where your muscles will expand. So if you are contest prepping, for example, you're behind stage and you can't get that pump up, probably because you don't have enough carbohydrates in your system. If you've already noticed at that point, it's already too late. So in the muscles, we can store a fair bit actually, 500 grams, roughly, of carbohydrates, of glycogen in the muscles. Now, on top of that, we can also store some in the liver. Now, we mentioned that the liver is a kind of like a processing plant, if you will, for carbohydrates and for glucose to turn into glycogen. So there isn't a lot that we can hold in there, but that's because it's kind of passing through. But you can still get around 100 to 120 grams, roughly, sitting in your system there. So look, that is roughly around 620 at the upper echelons of carbohydrates that you can hold in your system. So there is a fair bit, and remember the body does want to use that as its preferred energy source. Now again, they are rough estimates because if your metabolism is really shot, if you've been doing a lot of yo-yo dieting, or if you just don't have a lot of muscle, if you're quite a small framed person, that is obviously going to be a little bit too much for you. However, if you do get up to those upper levels, you'd be surprised how much food that you can really hold in your system. So an even easier way that you can decide if you need to go for some high or low glycemic index carbohydrates, you have these 3 factors that I personally put in consideration before I choose the carbohydrates for my meal. So if you're talking about high glycemic index, you're looking at around plus 70 on the index, and then obviously low, it's going to be under. Now, the burn off rate, how fast are these burning off? So obviously the high glycemic index is going to burn off really fast, which has its benefits, which we'll get into in a moment, but essentially means that there isn't a lot to it. So say if you consider like this is a carbohydrate, and then you have like dietary fiber around it, and then you have micronutrients around it. The body has to break down every layer before it can get into the carbohydrate. Where with the high GI, you haven't got any of that sort of stuff, so you've just got the carbohydrate there ready to go in. That's an accurate representation. So you get to burn off the carbohydrates faster with that one. They're less satiating, which means that you're probably going to overeat on them if you aren't very good at controlling yourself when it comes to food, when it comes to intake. So if you're a person that binges, low GI might be something that you'd want to consider a little bit more of, but you do get a quick spike of energy with these ones. So again, if you were going to go and say do some training, if you just need a little bit of energy, obviously people like they will go for a little bit of sugar right when they're really feeling low, feeling flat. But if you're making sure that your energy is consistent throughout the day, you can eat high GI foods, you can have the fun stuff, and you don't have to worry about overeating it, because through the rest of the day you've been pretty consistent. Again, calories in, calories out, guys. But then obviously it's pretty much the opposite on the other side. So it burns a lot slower when you're eating your low GI foods. So that is something you want to put in consideration if you're spacing your meals out throughout the day, or if you're having a meal, you don't get a little bit of food for a little while. Then the next one is satiety. So you're going to be feeling, whoa, Jesus, what is that? Let's try that again. There we go. So satiety, so you want to make sure that you're getting your low GI carbohydrates. Again, it's going to be pushing those meals out further and further. You don't have to worry about snacking through the day as much. And then energy. So this one's a little bit different. So it's going to be pretty consistent energy. So you're not going to get that insulin spike, but you're also not going to get that crash. This one here is pretty consistent. So again, that's why we start looking at our low GI foods when it comes to energy restriction, because it's going to get us through to our next meals a little bit more. We start looking at those as well because there are, again, more micronutrients in them. There is more dietary fiber in a general sense. Full disclaimer, so the following is a bit of a blanket term, so don't take it for every little grain of salt that's in there. But when we start looking at our energy and just trying to figure out what's high GI, low GI, if you start looking at the colours, so like your dark leafy greens, start looking at like your dark oranges, the darker the colour, generally the more micronutrients, the more dietary fibre, and the lower on the glycemic index scale they are. And then the whiter they go, the more refined, the more processed they are, generally the higher on the glycemic index they go. So that's pretty much it, guys. Look, carbohydrates are your friend. They're not your enemy. You're not going to store extra fat. Again, calories in, calories out. Just make sure you're getting your carbohydrates in. You want to make sure that you are, purely for the fact that the protein that you're getting in, you want to use that for muscle recovery. You want to use that for hormone regulation. You don't want to then have to use your protein for energy. Leave that to your carbohydrates. And hey, carbohydrates taste fucking amazing. Why wouldn't you want to eat carbohydrates? But that is the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You know the usual. And stay tuned for next time when we make more videos about fitness stuff.